Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That is right. Hey, we're at Too Many Games.
We are
right
at
now.
Too Many Games right now, assuming we survived the trip there.
If we didn't, these are our last words.
So if you don't see any Instagram posts of us at Too Many Games on our Instagram, then perhaps we didn't make it. By the way, we have an Instagram, so you can follow us to see if we made it.
Don't say that. People are going to get worried. I don't post on that Instagram much.
Well, we'll at least post one when we're leaving, and maybe we'll post one when we arrive. We'll post one at 2 a.m. saying we made it. Hopefully we made it okay. And hopefully we'll make it back okay. But yeah, so we're at Too Many Games, hopefully hanging out with all the people that we said we were going to hang out in the pre-Too Many Games pod, which would have been out last Sunday. Then we're going to release another episode later about what actually happened at the convention.
Yeah.
We are probably actually, while you're listening to this, possibly driving home ourselves. So we're all in the car together.
Holding hands.
Holding hands. Just like that new game that I saw where you're chained together and trying to escape hell.
Was that a game you were recently playing?
I was not. If I had 3 friends, maybe I would. Actually, I've been recently playing a game that we're actually going to talk about this entire episode. I was recently playing Eternal Champions prior to recording this episode, which is what this episode is about based on the name of the episode. I'm not going to go too much into the detail about it because we're going to talk about it for the rest of this episode. So I'm going to just say that I played as Larson Taylor. Oh, I get it now because he's a cat burglar and his first name is Larson. That's funny. Anyway, yeah, I played as Larson Taylor, who's like this 1920s guy with some spiky knuckles. Yeah, and I got the crap kicked out of me. Yeah, the computer is not very nice. I was in the practice mode and I couldn't get like any sort of hits off. But yeah, so that's my recently played is the game that we're going to be talking about. So I'll have more opinions about the game as we proceed through the episode. But what about you, Zach? What have you recently been playing?
Recently, I've been playing Dino Run SE, released in 2011 by Pixel Jam Games. It's actually a game I definitely think I've talked about before. I just don't remember the last time I talked about it. Probably the last time I played it, which was probably years ago. Dino Run SE is a fun little game. It was made by Pixel Jam originally as a Flash game on Newgrounds, and later they released it as a standalone PC game, and they later have done remakes of it, and I think there's a sequel called Dino Run 2. Anyway, it's a short game where you play as a velociraptor, and you have to run away from a wall of doom that is chasing you because the Earth just got hit by a meteor. While running away, you have to collect eggs and avoid obstacles. It's kind of like playing that Google thing that pops up when you don't have internet. You know, when you're on a browser and you don't have any internet and it gives you the little dinosaur running game?
Yes.
It's like that, but more complicated because you have to jump over big pits and you have to avoid meteors and you have to jump over stegosauruses and you have to eat tiny little, I think they're supposed to be tiny mammals. You eat them and they speed you up. It's fun. It's one of those constantly running games, almost like Bit Trip Runner. It definitely comes from that era of indie games. I recommend it though if you want to play a short, fun game. That's Dino Run SE by Pixel Jam.
Just makes you think about dinosaur and Cadillacs. Anyway, we could talk a little bit about our memories in regard to Eternal Champions.
Before we do, we should say that Eternal Champions is a listener request from Andy from Australia, who I think holds the record for the furthest away a fan is from us.
That's true, unless we go the other way.
If we go the other way, we're back in Australia because the Earth is round.
Yes, we would say that Andy is the record holder for the person who is listening to us farthest away. When we are awake, Andy is sleeping because the sun is the opposite of where we are.
It's 11:25 a.m. there right now.
Well, somewhere in Australia. I think they have multiple time zones. So we don't know exactly where on the Australian continent, country, the big landmass down there where Andy is. But somewhere he's listening to Classic Gaming Brothers. And after this episode, and we butcher saying that Australia is a continent and country, he'll stop.
Well, we're sorry, Andy. But this episode's for you, and we're sorry about what we'll do to your memories of Eternal Champions. Getting into today's episode, though, yeah, we're talking about Eternal Champions, a fun game. In terms of my memories, I don't think I've ever actually played it growing up. I do remember seeing the box art for it. I think, so we used to go to a couple of rental stores that rented out Sega Genesis games. There was Fun Stuff Video, there was like a Family Video, and there's Blockbuster. And around the time that Blockbuster was transitioning over to next-gen stuff, they were transitioning over to PlayStation and N64 stuff. Fun Stuff still had Sega Genesis games, and we would go to Fun Stuff more often. And I'm pretty sure they had Eternal Champions. I at least remember seeing it, but Seth and I didn't really rent fighting games growing up. We owned Street Fighter, but we didn't really play too much of it together. I think we were a bit too competitive for fighting games, because sometimes what would happen is if we were playing a game for a while and I was doing good at it, Seth would shut the game system off.
Incorrect.
No, that happened at least twice.
That's how I win. Or sometimes just pull your controller and then freeze the game system because we moved it slightly to the left.
But we did have a bit of a competitive nature, so I'm not surprised that it's possible our parents didn't want us to play fighting games.
The competitive nature was, I won.
I have since visited Eternal Champions. It's a game that's on my EverDrive, so I've definitely given it a try. It feels more like a Mortal Kombat game than a Street Fighter game in the sense of it's a bit more violent.
I felt that as well. I feel like Mortal Kombat and Eternal Champions are more, I feel like, realistic graphics, where Street Fighters is more drawn graphics.
Well, like Eternal Champions is still cartoony, but it's not. They are a bit more realistic looking. Like they have natural proportions as opposed to like Street Fighter, which has, or Zangief, who's just all torso.
Yeah, or Dalsham, who can stretch his arms across the entire screen. I think that even though Street Fighter has normal people, I think they're weird normal people, where Eternal Champions also has a little weird normal people, but they're like weird, slightly weird normal people.
They're what people would look like, right? Like they don't look too outrageous, but it is also a pretty violent game.
It's faster than Mortal Kombat, though. It's like Street Fighter speed, but Mortal Kombat violence. So if you ever needed something that was Street Fighter speed, but Mortal Kombat violence, you could play Eternal Champions.
To get into its history, Eternal Champions was developed and published by Sega of America, and was a game that would be bundled with the Sega Activator. Now, during the 1990s, Sega and Nintendo were in a heated war with each other. Mostly they're trying to outdo the other company. This is usually referred to as the Bit Wars, but it extended beyond the two companies talking about which system was more powerful. There was also a wide variety of peripherals released, and a lot of times these peripherals were designed so that they could be like, well, our system has the better peripheral. So when Nintendo released the Zapper, Sega released the Phaser. It looked cooler, and Sega was like, it is cooler. And then when the Super Nintendo came out, Nintendo released the Super Scope, and Sega released the Menacer. Like, they were always trying to outdo each other. In 1993, Sega released something called the Activator. It's similar in some ways to the Power Pad, which was a Nintendo peripheral released back in 1988. The Activator was a device that was designed to allow you to be the controller. The Power Pad was kind of like a twister pad that you could plug into your system, and you could stand in certain places that would correspond to buttons. The Activator was supposed to be like the one step beyond, because you were supposed to be able to be button free. You stand in the center of this ring, and you could control the game, and it was supposed to be all the rage. The Activator was demonstrated back in January of 1993 at CES, where it was shown with Streets of Rage 2. Now, if you've never seen the Activator, it's made of plastic. It's a plastic octagon with a hollow center. That hollow center is where you stand, so it's kind of an octagonal ring, and each of the octagon sides has a sensor, and the sensor shoots an invisible infrared beam up into the air, and when you move, you disrupt the beam, which translates to a button movement. So if you like put your hand over a certain direction, it corresponds to left. If you move a certain direction, it corresponds to A, and so on. The device would retail for $79.95, which today with inflation is $172.22, and would be a major flop for Sega for a couple of reasons. One, $79.95 is very expensive for a piece of plastic that you stand in the center of and wave your arms around, especially because all it does is the same thing a controller does. Another reason why it flopped is because it's less accurate than a controller. So you have this octagon that you have to set up and make room for. You stand in the center, you wave your arms around, and sometimes nothing happens because infrared is unreliable. And with those two things, a kind of outrageous price point for what it was and not being entirely accurate for the people who did buy it, it overall failed. However, 4 games were specifically designed for the Activator. This would be Best of the Best, Championship Karate, Greatest Heavyweights, Streets of Rage 3, and Eternal Champions. All of these games would release with a label that says activated, meaning it was designed to be played with the activator peripheral, though all of the games can be played without the activator. Just want to make that point clear. You can play Eternal Champions without the activator. There are also some other games that you could play the activator on, but they weren't considered activated games. This would be Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition, and Streets of Rage 2. All of these games were actually used to promote the activator, but they were not considered activated games. Eternal Champions, like I mentioned, did not need to be played with the activator. However, you did need a 6-button controller. So if you had a 3-button controller, you were kind of SOL because the game requires you to have more than 3 buttons. So you did have to go and pick up a 6-button controller if you did not have one.
Would it allow you to just kick or do whatever the 3 buttons did?
Yeah, it would, but I think you can't access some of the special moves.
Oh yeah, no, you'd get your crap kicked out of you because that game is hard. But I 100% remember the activator being a thing, and it was whenever I see those like Skyrim setups where somebody is on a treadmill that's like a omnidirectional treadmill, I think of the Sega activator.
The Sega activator is silly.
The Sega activator is amazing, and it's only going for $115 on eBay.
At Too Many Games, if we see an activator, we'll pick it up and we'll stream it on Extra Life.
We're not going to do that.
We'll pick up 2 and we'll fight each other.
No, we're not going to spend $200 on activators. Back to about the game. The art for the characters per the game's credits was done by Ernie Chan. Chan's other work included art for Marvel and DC Comics, including issues of Doctor Strange, Conan the Barbarian, Power Man, and Iron Fist, and Batman. Along with the tie-in with the activator, Sega would also work with 7-Eleven to create a unique flavor of Slurpee called Sega Eternal Champions Cherry, which came in cups that included pictures of the characters. MTV also ran a promotion that offered a cash rebate. Another sponsorship was with the publication Electronic Gaming Monthly, who would go on to host tournaments across the United States with the game, though these tournaments were held before the game was completed, so players would only have access to 4 of the 9 characters. It was all to hype people up. Did Eternal Champions and Nick Arcade cross?
I doubt it, because in Eternal Champions, people like explode.
And Nickelodeon, beyond all the things that were happening on set, were kids friendly. The game also received a Sonic the Comic storyline in a standalone magazine called Eternal Champions Special, which adapted the game's story from what to what? From Eternal Champions to Sonic?
No, Sonic the Comic was not just Sonic. It was kind of like a Sega comic.
Oh, okay. So this is an Eternal Champions comic in a Sonic comic.
Yeah, so it was a standalone magazine called Eternal Champions Special, but it was sold under the Sonic the Comic label.
Ah, I see. Do you own it?
No, because I don't own any of the Sonic the Comic comics. They're all the Fleetway UK, like big scale magazines. I need to pick some up, but they're usually kind of pricey.
I see. Well, Andy, if you find yourself with too many Sonic the Comic comics, you know where to send them.
Please.
When I originally was going through this, I thought that the Eternal Champion special was adapted to the Sonic the universe. And then it was the Eternal Champions people fighting the Sonic people. That'd be great. Anyway, Eternal Champions now follows a being called the Eternal Champion that gathers souls from time and space at their moment of their death and then organizes a fighting tournament. Similar to other fighting games, there's always like this fighting tournament and people have to compete in them, mostly because that explains why you're fighting people over and over and over again across the world or universes. It's just generally the premise. The winner, though, of this tournament would be able to come back to life and be allowed to change their own fate. And the losers would die. Their soul was taken at the moment of their death, and then they would die. So it's kind of like that the limited show that ran Dead Like Me with Ellen Wolf, where she grabs people right before they die so that their souls are protected from whatever horrible atrocities that was going to happen to their bodies. It's like that, but instead of rescuing them, she tells them to fight for her pleasure.
Yeah, it's also kind of like an episode of Doctor Who, where he saves one of his companions by taking her from the split second before she dies.
So I do have some questions in regards to possibly if I watched the beginning of the game, I would understand my answers. But does this game assume that all time is going on at the same time across all time?
Man, that is a complicated question. I don't know if it does, but I'm going to say yes.
because there are people from various different times, which I assume whoever's collecting these people, right? There's somebody collecting them. And is it the Eternal Champion?
Yeah, Eternal Champion.
Yes. So the Eternal Champion's going around and collecting these souls. But they're people from all these different time periods collected. So either the Eternal Champion's very bad at scheduling and doesn't know how to get a fight started in any convenient time, or all time exists at once at one time. Or the Eternal Champion is able to be in all times at once, which is probably more likely, because the Eternal Champion can be in any time and then just collects people at their time. So like the first guy that we're going to talk about is Jeddah Max. He's a Russian aristocrat from 1899 who worked as a circus acrobat in secret and would go on to get murdered by a Chinese member of the Boxer movement. So did the Eternal Champion go back to 1899 and get Jeddah Max before he died and then wait until somebody else died? Or did he travel forward? And is he like a time traveler? Because these people are dead, time's already elapsed. I don't know. Maybe they live in this some weird pocket dimension with no time.
I think he's like the Watcher, and he maybe exists like outside of time and reality.
The next character is Larson Taylor, who's a 1920s cat burglar from Chicago. Larson was tasked with planting evidence in the hospital room of a mafia leader, but that evidence would go on to be a bomb, and it exploded, and it killed Larson.
As well as a lot of people in the hospital.
But Larson was the only one picked to go on to become a ascended Eternal Champion prospect.
Yeah, I don't think the champion was like scooping up people in the burn unit.
There is Midnight, who is a vampire who had been hiding in Vietnam, who was once a former British biochemist named Mitchell Middleton Knight, which is why his name is Midnight with a K, because he's a vampire, and his last name is Knight with a K. So he's Midnight. Midnight was mutated after he was tasked to spike the water supplies of the Viet Cong. The chemicals he spiked the water with created a mutation that would go on to turn him into a vampire, and he would later be killed by the U.S. hired vampire hunter man, which makes sense, because that's what the U.S. likes to do, is that they like to screw with people, and then if you screw up, they kill you. Well, I don't know if they actually like to do that, but it's happened before.
Yeah, so when I was reading like the description for Midnight, it just said like the US government hired vampire hunter, which makes me think that he's a contracted vampire hunter. But do you think the US government has a special budget? Like, is it, do they take discretionary funds?
No, he's probably a retainer. They probably pay like an X number salary a year. Well, clearly if you can get mutated by putting arsenic in the water, like maybe turning into vampire is a common occurrence in this US, and they need to have one on retainer.
Well, my question is, he might have been trying to turn the Viet Cong into vampires.
Well, how would that help?
I don't know, but it turned him into a vampire.
Maybe because he was a bad biochemist. It never said that he was a good biochemist.
That's true.
Well, I like that it's a US hired vampire hunter. So it's either a US hired vampire hunter that is like a random one that they hired, like a vampire hunter that the US hired, or it's just the singular US vampire hunter that they hire. I like to think that he runs a department of vampire hunting. Anyway, then there's Rax Coswell, or Rax Coswell, who is a cyber kickboxer from 2345 who had a match rigged by his trainer who uploaded a virus into his exoskeleton that would go on to kill him. And he kind of looks like the cyborg from Mortal Kombat. Then there is Shadow Yamada, who is a ninja from 1993. Popular time to be a ninja in Japan. She was killed when her employer said, "It's 1993. Why are you doing this?" No, she was killed when her employer tossed her off a skyscraper before she could expose the syndicate that hired her.
So here's how I imagine the story goes, right? She's on top of the building with the syndicate that hired her, and she says, "I'm going to expose you." And they say, "We're standing on top of a building." And then they push her.
They say, "You're exposed," and they push her off.
The next character on this list is Slash, no last name. Slash is a hunter from 50,000 BCE. He was sentenced to death by his elders because he was too smart.
We only developed surnames after the Black Death.
Then we have Xavier Pendragon, who was an alchemist from 1692. He was charged with witchcraft during the Salem witch trials and killed. Sounds like he was practicing some form of witchcraft. Yeah. So I think this is the one witch they got right.
Well, we don't think that you should kill witches, but an alchemist named Pendragon is probably as close as you're going to get.
Next up, we have Trident. Trident is an artificial life form created by the Atlanteans in 110 BCE. He was killed by a rival rival prior to a gladiator tournament, and his death led to the Roman Empire banishing the Atlantean people to the sea.
Well, so if he was an artificial life form who went into prior to a gladiator tournament, so then the Atlanteans are like, you screwed with our chance of winning. Couldn't they just create another one?
Oh, okay. You know what? I mixed up the story a bit, and I apologize for that. According to the official Sonic the Comic wiki, which has a story about Trident's life, he was crushed by a stone pillar that the Romans dropped on him because they found out that he was, they thought he was going to win. And this led to the Great Dam of Atlantis failing, thus causing the island to sink.
Oh, see, that makes more sense. Before it sounded like they created somebody and then the Romans killed him because they were the rivals, but then they were pissed that he was dead before he could show up to his fight, and then they banished the Atlanteans. But the story that you said about him getting crushed by a pillar and then the dams breaking and Atlantis going into the sea makes sense. Well, makes more sense than before.
Lastly, we have Jonathan Blade. He is a Syrian bounty hunter from 2030 CE, only less than 10 years in the future. Yeah, 6 years away. He was hired by the government to track down a terrorist who stole a virus, and wouldn't you know, he captured that terrorist, but the virus got released and he got killed by the virus.
Enter COVID 2020.
Well, here's the thing. These might be some of the best fighters according to the Eternal Champion. They got killed in kind of the worst ways.
Did the game ever specify that he was getting the best fighters? Was he just getting people who could get their souls sucked out at the right time? They were probably just convenient fighters. He's like, right, I got this guy from the 20s who's got spike knuckles. All right, you're good enough. Get in there.
Now, as you can guess, the game is a fighting game where you can choose to play as one of the above-mentioned characters and enter a tournament against the other characters. It also has multiplayer because it's a fighting game. The gameplay is similar to other fighting games, so you fight your opponent and you punch them or use a special attack. You can grapple opponents. If you get close enough to them, the grapple is pretty powerful. I think you actually can't block the grapple, so you have to be able to dodge away from it. There are unique special attacks that each player has, and if you're hit multiple times in a row, you'll become stunned and your opponent will get a free hit. Unlike other games that may require kind of a unique button combo, special moves are performed by either pressing multiple buttons together or holding back or down to charge and then pressing up or forward with a button to kind of proceed with the movement. The game does feature a special attack meter that will decrease each time you use a special attack. You can retreat into a defensive stance, which will allow the meter to charge back up. And the stages have different elements that you can use to defeat your opponent. So if you get your opponent into a certain part of the stage, you can use a background element or a foreground element to kill them. For example, I saw a video of someone who threw one of the characters on top of a pyramid, and that pyramid impaled them. So you can do some pretty nasty things with people in this game. It is very violent.
Now, upon release, the game did very well and was one of the top-selling games for the Mega Drive in the UK, being ranked at number 2 in a list of top sellers in an issue of Computer and Video Games. Reception was mixed in some places. Mean Machine Sega gave it a 97. EGM gave the game a 91%, though individual reviewers within EGM were heavily divided, with 2 recommending the game and the others giving it a lower score due to them not really liking the graphics. Also, let's remember that EGM was hyping the game up through tournament usage. When the game was re-released on the Wii Virtual Console, it received a 6 out of 10 from IGN. However, since then, the game has been fondly remembered when the publication Complex calling it one of the most successful faux Mortal Kombat fighters. And in 2013, they would rank it as, they being the publication Complex, would rank it as the 24th best 2D fighting game ever made out of, I don't know, hopefully not 25, because then that's pretty low.
Now, a direct sequel would be released in 1995 called Eternal Champions Challenge from the Dark Side, which was released for the Sega CD. Features all of the original characters from the first game, but it also adds 15 additional characters to the roster, so you got a whole bunch of characters to mess with. There was a spin-off beat-em-up that was released in 1995 called Chicago Syndicate, which features Larson Taylor in action as the cat burglar. The spin-off is set in an alternate timeline, or perhaps the timeline where Larson Larson is the victor of the championship. And in this timeline, Larson disposes of the bomb before it gets detonated. However, because he disposed of the bomb, he is now a target for the mob, and the mob is after him. Hence why it's a beat 'em up, because the mob is constantly trying to kill you. There was another spin-off as well called Experts, which I think Seth played, or maybe I played, as a retro rewind.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Experts was released in 1996, and it features the character of Shadow. Similar to Chicago Syndicate, this game takes place in an alternate reality where Shadow survives and forms a vigilante group called the Experts. There was also a handheld version of the game created by Tiger Electronics called Eternal Champions Special Moves Edition, which features a Tiger Electronics version of the game. So it's simplified but playable, which I think should have been the motto for Tiger Electronics. I think their motto should have been simplified but playable. A third game in the series was advertised, but it would be canceled, largely because Virtua Fighter was coming out and Sega said, no more Eternal Champions, let's focus on Virtua Fighter. So they canceled it, which is kind of what Sega does. Sega usually will take an IP that they're really excited about, and then something better comes along and they're like, this thing is so much more nicer.
They're like, nobody knows what we've done with this before.
And with that, that's Eternal Champions, or at least all that we had written up about it. I think it's an interesting game, and I certainly think the plot is unique for a fighting game.
And I think being ranked number 2 in the UK, if we grew up in the UK, which I believe Andy actually did or spent some time there, maybe we would have also had fond memories of Eternal Champions.
Yeah, I'm sure we would have. Well, we're going to get into our retro rewind. Seth, do you want to go first?
No, you're fine. You can go.
Okay. Seth had me play X-Men Children of the Atom. X-Men Children of the Atom is an arcade game that was produced by Capcom, and Seth had me play the PC version released for DOS. It's based on the X-Men comic book and is the first fighting game produced by Capcom using characters under license from Marvel. It was also released in the 1990s, so the X-Men animated series was heavily influential, and the game actually features voice actors from the series reprising their roles, which was fun. The DOS version is actually really good. It features graphics from the arcade version. It's nice, colorful, the speed seems accurate, though without being super familiar with the arcade version, I can't tell you whether or not it's one-to-one. However, from what I can tell, it is fairly accurate to the arcade version, and I think it definitely holds up. Next week, Seth, you can play Urban Strike, the sequel to Jungle Strike, or as we know it, Urban Strike, the sequel to Jungle Strike, the sequel to Desert Strike, Return to the Gulf, for the Sega Genesis.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm looking forward to that game. Zach had me play SOS, Sink or Swim, which in this case, SOS for this game stands for Sink or Swim. It also kind of stands for Save Our Ship, because in the game you have to save people on their ship. This game was developed by Zeppelin Games. It is a puzzle video game that was released in 1993 for MS-DOS, Amiga, Atari ST, Genesis, Game Gear, and the edition that I played, SNES. Fun fact, the Genesis and Game Gear games are called SS Lucifer Man Overboard. You play as Kevin Codner, and you show up to help these like Mario-looking guys. They all look like Mario, and there's a bunch of them, and they act like lemmings. And you're trying to get them off this boat, and you have like bombs, and you have like this little robot that you can throw, and there's switches that you have to get. The gameplay is actually pretty fun, and the music is it's puzzle game music-y, but it's like still like fun to listen to. But I had a lot of issues with the game. Not me playing it. I always have issues with playing games. But it kept bugging out, and like I don't know if it was the game or the thing I was playing it on, but ultimately it did not run that well for me, and I wasn't really able to experience the game past the first puzzle that I'd completed. So it's not that I was incompetent, it's that the game would bug out. So ultimately I think if you get a good working copy, it's an okay puzzle game. There are better puzzle games out there. So I wouldn't necessarily run out and play this game immediately. It's like Lemmings, except instead of take all the Lemmings people, blow them up to be like triple the size and make them Marios. That's all you got. It's okay. Next week, Zach, you can continue on with your X-Men journey and play X-Men 2 Game Master Legacy.
I realized that I could probably take all of our retro rewinds that you've had me do of the X-Men games, and then we'd have an X-Men episode just fully crafted.
Yeah, it's true. You could.
Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Andy, for the recommendation for this episode. If anyone has any memories of playing Eternal Champions, or Andy, if you want to let us know what we got wrong, send us an email to classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. You can find find us at classicgamingbrothers.com. We're also available on Facebook, Classic Gaming Brothers, Instagram, Classic Gaming Brothers, X, CG Brothers Pod, or Blue Sky, CG Brothers Pod. As mentioned, we're at Too Many Games this weekend, so if you are listening to this episode at like 10 in the morning and you see two people that look very similar to our logo, say hi to us. If you don't see two people that look very similar to our logo, don't say hi to them. They are strangers. Don't say hi to strangers. Anyway, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's
right.
That's right.